Welcome to BFBS Sitrep with me, Sian Grzeszczyk Melbourne, and this week we are joined by a very special guest, the master storyteller of conflict and war, Bernard Cornwell, creator of much-loved characters including the brave but bolshy rifleman Richard Sharpe, who fought through the Napoleonic Wars. His new book, Sharpe's Storm, is set in France in 1813 at the end of the Peninsular War. You've also created Uhtred of Bebbanburg, born a Saxon, raised a Dane, the hero of the Last Kingdom, as well as books on specific battles such as Agincourt and Waterloo. Welcome, Bernard. It's lovely to have you with us.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
I'm also joined by Professor Mike Clarke, Sitrep's defence analyst, and I think, Mike, a big fan of military historical fiction.
Yes, particularly of Bernard's. I always tell people I've read every book he has written. All of the series on the American Civil War and the American War of Independence and Anglo-Saxon England, and the modern novels, mainly about a lot of them feature sailing. So I've read, I think, Bernard, everything you have written, including a great rollicking view of Shakespeare, which was great fun. Fools and Mortals. I loved it.
Amazing. Well, we've been asking the BFBS audience for their questions for Bernard. So let's kick off with a couple. Fred on YouTube wants to know, is there a story from British military history that you wanted to tell but have never had the opportunity to do?
Well, I've certainly had the opportunity if I wanted to do it, but I'm trying to think. It's strange because Mike just mentioned the Shakespeare book, Fools and Mortals, which is the only book I've written in which nobody dies. And I like that period. I wouldn't mind doing the Spanish Armada. I think that would be an interesting book to write. Whether I ever will, I don't know. But I'll stick with the Armada for the moment.
And Fools and Mortals, everyone's very cold in it because it's Elizabethan England. Everyone's cold in that book.
Yeah. Well, they probably were.
Exactly.
And related to that, Milan's on Reddit wanted to ask you, if you had to set the Sharpe series in another historical period, what would you choose and why?
Oh dear. Oh well, I think I'd choose the Duke of Marlborough, and go back to Blenheim and those battles. That would be an interesting series to write, but it would be almost as ambitious as writing Sharpe again. But it lurks at the back of my mind. But I'm getting too old now, so I think somebody else can do that.
Mike, I know you've got 1,000 questions for Bernard yourself.
Oh, yes. Well, one of the reasons that I think your books are so popular, Bernard, is that it's the literalness of the way you describe not just battles, but engagements and military service and so on. There's that inner truth. And I remember years ago, a British retired general who'd been in quite a lot of firefights, some of whom have not recorded. And he said, firefights are all about chaos. You create chaos. And in this book, you said, towards the end, this commando raid that takes place over the river towards the end of Sharpe's Storm, you said Sharpe wanted 20 minutes of chaos. And I remembered what my friend told me some years ago, because the idea is you create chaos and you back yourself to cope with it better than the other guys.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I mean, I don't have experience of that unless working in television counts, which it doesn't. But Sharpe does understand that if he can create chaos, because he's the creator of it, he knows what's going on. So it's not really chaotic to him, but the poor frogs are running around like chickens with their heads cut off.
And you always describe Sharpe as being this character. I mean, he's a murderer. He's murdered quite a lot of people, which he freely admits, as well as people he's killed legitimately. But when things get violent, he goes cool. He has an ability, which some great fighters and commanders have had, to see a coolness of what he's doing, almost to see things in slow motion. And you refer to it again in Sharpe's Storm here. He has this ability to keep his head in the middle of the chaos and see what needs to be done.
Well, I think that's true, but it's probably because he has the same ability that Wellington had, which is saying an awful lot. But the one thing I've always admired about Wellington is that the more chaotic, the noisier, the more awful the battle became, the cooler he seemed to stay, and he seemed to understand. I mean, right from the beginning at Talavera, at least in the peninsula, he understands where the danger is at a point where nobody else does, and moves a battalion into line to meet it. And it's certainly true at Waterloo, which it becomes noisier and noisier and more confusing. Wellington never, ever loses his composure.
People said at Waterloo, toward the end there, before that, about 7 o'clock in the evening, that people who saw Wellington, he said he was very upright on his horse, he was pale, he was gaunt, but his voice was very stable, his voice was very normal. But the man was under enormous strain, but he just wouldn't show it.
And I think he understood that too. I mean, it's like, when you're flying and the aeroplane begins to shake and flames begin to appear somewhere, you look at the flight attendants and think, well, they don't look worried, so I don't need to be worried. And I know Wellington understood that. If he looked worried, then that sense of panic was going to spread among his troops.
But Sharpe, I mean, like Uhtred, I mean, they do have a lot of self-doubt. Again, it comes out in this book. Sharpe often gives very incisive orders, and then he thinks to himself, I hope I'm right about that. So I'm guessing, because he has to make guesses, but he can't show indecision in front of the troops.
And you've got to show confidence.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's
But he is
true.
full of self-doubt as well, isn't he?
Well, I imagine only an idiot wouldn't be. I mean, if you're in the middle of any battle,
But he's, I mean, in one sense, Sharpe is exactly the sort of man that modern writers lament, because they're always a typical man's man who has all these hang-ups, but he won't talk about them. He's traditional in that sense. He won't give himself to emotionally to many things.
Well, if you're a murderer, it's probably best to keep your mouth shut.
Yep.
Yeah, he's no role model, is he?
Sean, sorry, there are more technical questions, I know, than these human issues coming in.
Yes, there are plenty of questions that we've received. One from Intelligent Mime on Reddit, who would love to know, did you ever have any worries about including real people or events like the Duke of Wellington in fictional stories?
No, I never worried about it, except the slight concern of, do I get him right? And strangely, after writing Sharpe for over 40 years, I think I know the first Duke of Wellington. And part of knowing him is knowing he would dislike me intensely because he hated authors. And sadly, he would never give an interview. I mean, if a writer sat down with the Duke and said, what was it like to be at the Battle of Waterloo? He'd get a very short and sharp answer. The only people he would ever open up to were women, because he liked women. He especially liked intelligent women. And almost all the best stories about the Duke come from women, because he told it to them.
Picking up on that lack of detail, that lack of source material in certain areas that he's talking about, Andy Melbourne had a question about, are you not tempted to write about modern day conflicts because we have so much more source material?
No, because there's too much source material and I'm not going to get it right. I mean, next year I'm going to visit the Falkland Islands, and it'll probably be a very brief visit, but I'll be fascinated to see where our troops did so magnificently. But I don't think I'll be tempted to fictionalize it, because I'm not sure I could fictionalize it, because the guys who were there would say, oh, you know fuck all about it. And they're right, I do.
You yourself tried to join the army 3 times, but you were turned down because of your eyesight. So if you had got in, what would your dream have been? Would you have been an infantryman?
Oh, yes, yes. I was told I'd be a valuable member of the Pay Corps, and I thought, this is not the career I envisage.
I'll be putting some more audience questions to you, Bernard, in a minute. But first, Mike, you've got plenty more.
Yeah, just talking about the personal side, being an infantryman. Again, we get in Sharpe's Storm here. He refers a few times to bayonet fighting. And again, I remember speaking to a major in the Marines. He said twice in his career he's been involved in bayonets. Once he was told to fix bayonets in the Falklands. And the second time in Iraq, he gave the order to fix bayonets. And he said something inside changes as soon as bayonets get fixed. And even the sound of bayonets being fixed have an enormous effect on the men, and certainly affect the people standing opposite the men. And you refer to this, swords. I mean,
yeah, well,
it's the most horrendous sort of infantry fighting.
Yes, and there are endless remarks, I mean, written by diarists and letter writers from the Peninsular War of what it was like when the British fixed bayonets and the French flinched. Well, there's a wonderful thing I've seen on a movie once. I mean, not a movie. I mean, this was television film, a news event. I mean, as you can imagine, in America, they're very, very fond of having reenactments of the Revolutionary War because they win. And there's a battalion in Massachusetts who these poor guys have to play the Brits, and they wear red coats. And the commander of I can't remember now which battalion it is, got bored with always losing. So he ordered his men to fix bayonets and charge. And you see the rebels, 1 stop, 2 turn, and 3 run away. And as they run, they go through the car park, and they're pursued by redcoats through the car park with fixed bayonets. And he said that taught the buggers.
Yeah, that's what had happened.
And, I mean, it's wonderful to see.
You see, one of the things that I think makes people so enamoured with your historical writing is this sensory element, that you really put yourself into the position of somebody, and you're very good at creating this sense of, you know, what it was to have the necks chafed by the stocks of the packs digging into their shoulders as they move. And I think, you know, Bernard, you're obsessed with bad weather. I mean, in the Battle of the Neve, of course, the weather was very bad.
It was terrible, yeah.
Yeah, and you really went for it in the retreat to Corunna in 1812. I mean, the weather was awful in the Galician Mountains. You really had a ball on that one. I mean, you love bad weather because you get this the sensory sense of what it's like to have a wet uniform all the time, never be able to dry it and so on.
Well, yes. I mean, because it must have been.
Yeah,
it must have been absolutely horrific. And with boots that never properly fit.
Exactly. No, I just think I always say
curious about Sharpe's Storm, because the publisher suggested the title, and once I'd written it, I thought, well, there isn't a storm in it really.
But there's driving rain from start to finish.
Driving rain. Well, there was in the campaign.
Yeah. No, honestly, Bernard, I think I've often thought, you know, there's not a lot of sex in your books, but there's a lot of gratuitous weather.
I apologise for
You're
that.
very gratuitous with the weather. I mean, poor old Sharpe and his riflemen are slogging through bad weather from start to finish in all of your books.
That river crossing as well. I mean, what I really love is that you capture that sense of the military sense of humour, you know, as they're crossing the river, you know, them saying, well, they didn't tell us about this in the recruitment meeting.
I'm sure a lot of the soldiers think that all the time. And I must say that there may not be any overt sex, but Sharpe gets his share. I mean, there is one scene, I can't remember, I think it's in Sharpe's Sword, where he gets to search the Marquesa for lice. I think that's the nearest I got to an actual sex scene.
Yes, well, that's near enough, thank you.
Well, moving on, Ned on Instagram would love to know what lay behind the decision to give Sharpe a heavy cavalry sabre rather than a more mainstream sword.
I think it was actually carrying a heavy cavalry sword. I now own one which hangs above the fireplace, and I mean, it is a ghastly weapon, and it was not a good weapon. It was ill-balanced, and the fact that it didn't have a leaf point meant that it glanced off Frenchmen's ribs and didn't end up really slaughtering them, so you actually had to cut the back blade down. And that just gave him something slightly different, that's all. I mean, it was just that no officer in his right mind would carry one because it's very heavy and very unwieldy. And you've got to be a pretty strong guy to wield one. I know because I've cleared undergrowth with it. And it just made him that bit different.
And Mike, you've got a question about muskets, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I imagine you must have fired some muskets and rifles in your research.
I have, yes.
And I mean, I have as well, a couple of times. And I was astonished at the complicated nature of loading the Baker rifle as opposed to the India pattern musket is quite different, isn't it?
It is
and
different.
So the skill you need to be a rifleman was quite different to being an infantryman.
Yeah. I mean, if you even bothered to wrap the bullet in the in the leather patch, which I think a lot of them did. And it is difficult to load, and you're hammering the thing down. And what astonished me is that you pull the trigger and there's a gap between that and the actual thing firing, which is actually a gap you can measure. It's, and you think, oh gosh, it's a misfire, and suddenly there's a horse kicking your shoulder.
And with musket fire, you're just pointing in the direction of an enemy, and with rifle fire, you've got something to aim at. I mean, there is a purpose in taking an aimed shot, which is what the riflemen were all about.
Yes, although those useless sights they had on the Baker, but I guess it must have worked. And there's Rifleman Plunkett killing a general at 800 paces. It's not bad. Well, I mean, I think the rifle was a war-winning weapon. I mean, because of its accuracy, and because if you're in the skirmish line, you actually are thinning out the enemy's officers and senior non-coms before they get within.
And that's described very well in the Battle of Saint-Pierre, the way in which they thinned out.
Or even before that, is it Arcang, where
yes.
They really stop a brigade of artillery in its tracks. Not rifle fire, that was musket fire and rifle fire, but I'm sure the rifles were doing the worst damage, picking off the gunners.
And in artillery terms, round shot versus howitzers? I mean, again, the howitzers make quite a big contribution in these battles that you describe in this book.
Well, yes, and we had the case shot, shrapnel.
Yeah, as you say there, you describe how deadly it was.
Oh, it was deadly. They hated it, the French, because they had nothing like it. But it's interesting because it didn't work at first because it tended to explode just after it left the muzzle. And then eventually they worked out it was the friction of the balls and the gunpowder inside the shot that was causing that. And then they packed it tighter and it began to work.
But the fuses had to be cut really cleverly, didn't they? Really precisely, so that it exploded above the heads of the enemy.
But if you did that, I mean, the French really hated it.
Of course, yeah.
Who can blame them? But I mean, the worst is canister.
Yes.
I mean, canister is a very nasty weapon, but loading a round of canister on top of a round shot.
Can you explain what that is?
Well, canister is just a tin can, which is filled with musket balls, and there's no explosive inside like case shot. And when it's fired, the tin can splits as it leaves the muzzle, and the musket balls spread out like buckshot, so it turns the cannon into a giant shotgun. You've got a French column coming up to say hello to you, and you fire one of those at it, and you're going to take out 50, 60, 70 men in one shot, if not killing them all, wounding an awful lot of them. It was a nasty weapon. And really it only starts being useful at about 300 paces. Beyond that, the fan spreads too wide. But at 300 paces, if you're an attacker, and the enemy's waiting for you with canister, it's time to get really worried at 300 because you're about to get hit.
I mean, just briefly, back to the professional soldiers and the riflemen. You describe very interestingly here how the pickets would cooperate with each other because there's no point in killing a good, sensible person on the other side. So the pickets would exchange gifts
Wellington
and they'd trade with each other.
Yes.
And Wellington knew all about that.
Yes, and the one that amused me, which I steal from reality and put in the book, is the British soldiers would give money to a French picket and say, go and buy me some brandy. And the guy would go off, but in order to ensure that he came back, the Frenchman would give the Brit his musket. And he'd hold on to his musket as surety.
Yeah. And here we have Pat Harper holding the Frenchman's musket, and Sharpe walks up to him and said, what are you doing? He said, oh, I've sent somebody off to buy some brandy.
Yeah, and that happened, and it worked the other way around. The French would ask us to give them tea, coffee, or tobacco. And if it was a rifleman on the picket, he'd give the guy his Baker rifle, and he'd go off with his money, and then come back, and he'd exchange the rifle for the goods. I mean, they were very friendly.
And it was partly the respect of professional soldiers for each other, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there was also, as Wellington said, there's no point in killing pickets. So if we're about to advance, you can warn them that we're coming, which sounds ludicrous today, but it actually does make a certain sort of sense. And they did get on with each other, the pickets. Not surprising, as
because they inhabited the same bit of ground.
Yeah, they were supplying each other with brandy and tobacco.
Let's take another question from our audience. Mr. H on Instagram says, which period of time did you enjoy researching the most for the books? And connected to that, Greg would like to know, in writing historical fiction, you obviously have to deal with historical events and think about how to weave your story ideas around them. But how do you get into the historical details of the ways people in the past used to think, speak, and behave?
Well, a lot of that has to be imagination, although we're very fortunate with the Napoleonic period because so many people wrote their memoirs or diaries or letters. So that's possible. That's really easy there because you just read and read and read and read and read. It's much more difficult with the Saxons because there's no memoirs. And a lot of what there is not even real. I mean, Asser's Life of Alfred, some people think was written in the 14th century, not in the 9th and 10th. But there's Anglo-Saxon poetry, which is remarkably revealing of what it was like to be in a shield wall. But I think there is still a lot of imagination. I mean, I know what it was like to be in an infantry square at Waterloo because I've read their diaries, and they're very good at describing what that was like. I have no idea what it was like to be in a shield wall, but I am blessed with imagination, and I shudder to even think what it must have been like. It must have been absolutely horrible, but they did it.
And when you take, say, a professional historian, Elizabeth Longford, to my mind, the best historian, best biographer of Wellington for me. And Elizabeth Longford, in her 2 volumes, she uses her imagination again and again. It's a superb history, but it's full of imagination. The best historians exercise their imagination as well.
I think they have to, yes. I'm supposed to. They're not. But I must agree with you about Elizabeth Longford, which is by far the best biography of Wellington. But I always say to people, I'm not an historian, I'm a storyteller. So although I want the background to be authentic, for me the most important thing is the story. And if that means I'm going to play merry hell with history, I'll play merry hell with history. Although I will always confess my sins in a historical note saying this did not happen. I made it happen.
Mike, you've got a question about officers in the ranks, haven't you?
Yes, I mean, it's interesting that all of your heroes are outsiders. Uhtred is an outsider, by birth, and Sharpe is absolutely the outsider. I'm sure because that makes these people more interesting. It gives you the scope to do more with them. But always with Sharpe, I mean, as this, rough diamond, this murderer who was given a choice of hanging or joining the army, he always comes up against idiot officers, real idiot officers. And the idiot officer in Sharpe's Storm is Sir Nathaniel Peacock. And as written, he comes over a little bit flat. You think, what a stereotype. But of course he was real.
He was real, yes.
And he ran away. And he took at least half of the 71st with him and opened the flank.
Yeah.
It's an astonishing story. I mean, his nerve went.
Yeah. I know poor Sir Nathaniel. And, I mean, I'd read what other men said about him who served with him, and they all say he was a bombastic idiot. I mean, he turned up from England and immediately set about saying to people, you've got it all wrong. I know how to win this war. We'll be in Paris in 6 months if you leave it to me, and I'll be a major general by Christmas.
Which he says in the book.
Yes, and he actually said that. And, I mean, you can't invent an idiot like that. I mean, he's just presented to you by history. And he ends up running away in terror.
Ran back to the artillery park and pretended to be wounded, which he clearly wasn't.
They said to him, or his doctor said to him, and I stole the line for the book, you don't need a doctor for your wound, sir, you need a tailor, because he had a bullet through his coattails.
Johnny Invictus on Instagram asks, how many times in total does the word bastard appear in Sharpe's dialogue across the chronology?
3,429. I have no idea. I think the sort of fixation on bastard came from Sean Bean, who says the word with great venom. I'm not aware that I write it that often, but I think since Sean, I've written it more.
Mm-hmm. What lessons do you think can be learnt from the battles you studied in the past for our armed forces today?
I wouldn't dare suggest anything. I mean, except I think that it's possible to learn from great armies like Wellington's army and their achievements what the value of discipline, passion, leadership is, nothing else, and a certain pride in the history of the army itself. And there's a lot to be gained from that. I mean, I'm sure that at certain points you think, well, those lads survived it, we can survive this too. But I think that's up to the soldiers themselves to draw the lessons.
Mike, you've got a question about how armies organise themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting that we know quite a lot about how Wellington's army was organised. Very clear. In the medieval armies, when you talk about Agincourt, they had an organisation as well, captains that recruited their men. The Anglo-Saxons had a different sort of thing. I mean, the organisation is always critical, isn't it? The ability of a leader to create some sort of organisation, even if one doesn't formally exist.
Yes, it's very hard to know how the Anglo-Saxons did it.
But Uhtred does it. I mean, Uhtred finds ways of sorting people into groups.
It's an obvious way to do it, isn't it? I mean, for Uhtred, it's the crew of a ship.
Yeah.
Is the basic unit, which is about the same, maybe a small company. And that company will fight by itself, and it will have a leader. And then you've got the beginnings of the battalion system. I mean, in the 100 Years' War, yes, you definitely see an organisation, maybe not as formal as the
But
one.
the captains would recruit their neighbours and people, and then they'd attach themselves to the Duke of Bedford or the Earl of Salisbury.
Well, the Duke would undertake,
Yeah.
or you take someone like my character, Thomas of Houghton, eventually he's in the position of saying, I will raise 100 archers and 20 men-at-arms. He would get some money from the treasury, and they'd have a deal, and the deal would be on a piece of paper which they would tear in a jagged pattern, so the two halves had to go together to prove it was the real one, and they'd give him some money, and then he'd turn up on the battlefield with 100 archers and 20 men-at-arms. And some people would be raising 1,000 men, and others would be raising 50. I mean, it's very ad hoc, but it worked.
And the discipline that Henry V could rely on at Agincourt is very clear.
Yeah.
I mean, the French didn't have much discipline, but he had the discipline to manipulate what his archers were doing and get them to join the infantry when he needed to.
I think there's an immense pride among the archers of what they could do. Without that pride, I'm not sure they'd have stuck.
But he had the organisation. He had the organisation under him that he could give an order. He could go to the flanks would understand the order and follow it and do what they were told to do. That's pretty
But there's
amazing
also
for
immense
1415.
morale. I mean, you know, we listen to Shakespeare, this great speech before the Battle of Agincourt. You know, he'll be my brother who bears his arm this day. And in fact, the people who were at the battlefield remember what he said just before the battle, which is, fellas, let's go. That's it. Or the other one says it's, let's go, fellas.
Yes.
And I find that really rather amusing, because one of the great leaders of today, not of battles but of sport, was Tom Brady of the New England Patriots, who won the Super Bowl 6 times. And just before they go on the field, you hear Tom saying, let's go.
Amazing.
Let's go is probably the greatest battlefield cry in the world.
And not one that you would guess would have been said back then. Alf712 wants to know, who is your favourite character that you've created?
Oh, I hate to disappoint or to give you the obvious answer, but it is Sharpe. I like Sharpe. I mean, I share my brain with Sharpe, or share my head with him. I mean, I'm walking the dog and I suddenly hear the voice saying, you silly bastard, why didn't you do this? I like Sharpe.
Mike, you've got a question about the future.
Yeah, I just wonder, Bernard, and this is the 25th, Sharpe Storm is the 25th in the series. You hint at the end that this might be the last one. Can I ask you, is that likely to be the case? People out there will want to know
I'd
this.
say yes, it's likely. If I'm honest with myself, I think 3 or 4 years from now, I'll suddenly hear that voice in my head saying, hey, let me out.
Yeah.
And I'd do another one.
But Uhtred is still with you?
Uhtred is still with me, and I'm actually writing one now with him. And after him, I don't know what.
Can you tell us anything more about what you're writing now then with Uhtred?
Well, one I shouldn't be writing, really, because it's another one which the first one with Uhtred, that goes back to the middle of his life. And what I'm having him do is something really quite extraordinary, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, because it gives away too much. But everyone's going to wonder, why doesn't he ever mention this again? This big life-changing event, and he never talks about it.
How hard is it to write a series and then go back to the middle of it again?
Well, that's the only real difficulty, and I did it with Sharpe so much, and, I get letters from people saying, you killed Rifleman Tongue in XYZ book, and he's alive again 3 books later, and I think, okay, damn, I made a mistake. And the biggest one for me, which amuses me, is that in the original 10 books I wrote, I always say that Sharpe learned to read in the dungeons at Seringapatam, and which was sort of believable. And of course, he can't become an officer unless he can read and write, so it was very essential that at some point in his early career he learns to read. And then I came to write Sharpe's Tiger much later, and got to the point where he has to go into the dungeons. And I suddenly realized he can only be there a maximum of 5 days. And he's very clever. He learns to read in 5 days. And I'm very proud of that chapter. It's a sort of wonderful piece of writing, because you get the impression that immense amounts of time are passing. And in fact, it's only 5 days. And Sharpe goes into the dungeon illiterate and comes out literate.
When you talk about this, Bernard, it reminds me of something I read years and years ago. E.M. Forster, it was a famous book, Aspects of the Novel, and I've always remembered what he said. He said that a writer sets his characters off, and then they do whatever they're going to do,
Yep.
and then the writer comes in at the end just to finish them off. has to finish the story, tie up the loose ends, but the characters run the story, and the writer is at their beck and call. And Sharpe and Uhtred do that. They run you ragged, and then you have to come and finish them off.
Yeah. And sometimes it's quite difficult to finish them off. I mean, I have got to the end of a book, the last chapter, not knowing how it's going to end. And you basically keep going until it does end.
Until he lets you free for a while.
One final question that we have for you, Bernard. Our military have so much love for your writing. Do you have a message for them and what they do every day to keep us safe?
Only pure admiration. I mean, utter admiration. I mean, if they don't get the impression that I love soldiers and soldiering and appreciate what they do, then I'm wasting my time. I remember meeting a retired warrant officer of the Scots Guards, and he'd had a job where he now looked after youngsters who had a drug problem, helping solve it. And I asked him why he was doing that, and he said, well, I was in the army, he said, and then I fought battles for those who couldn't fight for themselves. He said, I'm still doing it. And I think that's one definition of soldiering. Another one, which I put into The Fort, one of my books about the American Revolution, is when the British general who wins describes his life. He'd once served the forces in Portugal, and he said every year there's this huge parade on Black Horse Square in Lisbon, he said, and it's immense. And the whole army, Portuguese army, marches through, and what they leave behind is heaps of horse dung. He said, then it's our job to go out and sweep it up. And he said, that's a soldier's job. The politicians drop the dung and we go and sweep it up. And I mean, that's precisely what they did in the Falklands. The politicians messed it up. And in the end, it was necessary for the soldiers to go in and solve it. And they're fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. I have an immense admiration for the armed forces. And I guess I hope to show that appreciation in these books.
That's one of Sharpe's sort of principal belligerent points. I can't remember which book he says it in, but I think he says somewhere, doesn't he, that the job of a soldier is to protect those less able than himself.
Yeah.
And that's what soldiers do. People who can't protect themselves, a soldier protects them. And Sharpe feels that, and that's part of that's his underlying principle, even though he's a murderer.
Yes, but he only murders the wrong sort.
Bernard, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you. Mike, thank you very much as well. And also to our audience for all of those fantastic questions.
Thanks for watching. For more from BFBS Forces News, like and subscribe to our channel.